Welcome to DIY 360. I'm Kevin Bowe, and I have my old dear friend Jay Perlman here today. So, any of you guys who are interested in, or should I say, you live sound enthusiasts or sibilance enthusiasts, you're in the right place today. I don't remember how long ago it was that I did my first gig with you running sound, but I know that it was last century, and it was, I don't know if it was 80s or 90s, but I'm guessing it was 80s.
Late 80s.
Late 80s.
Uptown Bar.
Yeah,
Blues,
yeah.
One of those.
Exactly. So we go way back, and one of the reasons I wanted to have Jay here is because we're kind of getting excited about the other Jay and his the inception of his live sound program. So I thought we should start, instead of just musicians and music business people, we should start getting some of these cats in. And this guy's one of my favorites, and I will tell you why. There's a lot of sound guys who are great here. I'm gonna embarrass you, so you might wanna just tune out for a second, Jay. But what I, as a musician in town here for the last 30 years, what I look for in a sound guy is when you walk in, you feel this, like everything's gonna be okay. That zen. I don't like working with sound guys that are high-strung and nervous, and then you become like, you don't trust what's going on. And you gotta trust those monitors as a live performer, because that's what you live by. If your monitors go out during a live show, you might as well have your pants fall down. It's about as embarrassing. And when I'm working a live show with Jay, whether it was the 80s or any time since, I walk in and I just have this feeling of calm. It is really hard to rattle this guy. That's not always the case with sound people, because a friend of mine was doing a gig at a venue in town here, a prominent venue, and I won't say which one it was or who the friend was, but he walked in and they were sound checking, and the sound guy was, and this is just a chill gig, some people were talking quietly in the corner while he was sound checking, and the sound guy was like, okay, I'm gonna need everyone to be quiet now while we sound check. And so that's like a total mood wrecker, you know? And my musician friend noticed it, and he was like, so then it just puts a different vibe in the room. So that's why we've invited Jay Perlman here to talk to us. So my first question is, if I could do a little history with you, where were you born and raised?
I was born in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Grew up in Golden Valley, went to Armstrong High School.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Class of 81.
And did you start out playing an instrument or something, or were you on the board right from the beginning?
No, I took guitar lessons when I was 6, played the recorder probably before that, played the snare drum in school bands, bought a trap set, never conquered it. Stuck with guitar for quite a while, and then just recreational playing. And then through sound checking things over the years, I can make noise on most everything. But
So what was your first introduction to live sound, or where did you first realize that that was a gig and that you might be into it?
you know, there's a funny memory I have of being a little kid in my parents' car, and I heard a siren, and it was an inadvertent thing, and I said, oh, I bet the car, the police car is coming from that way. And my parents, for some reason, were impressed that I could tell this. And so they said, oh, you have good ears. And that just kind of stuck with me. Oh, I have good ears. So encourage people on things.
It's funny how a little bit of encouragement at a certain young age can steer your life.
Yeah, this is like an early memory. I was probably 4. So I remembered that. And then another big moment was when I was probably 12, and I heard my first pair of hi-fi headphones in stereo, and I still remember the record.
Cost Pro for AAAs?
No, they were the Sennheiser, the yellow ones.
Nice.
Pablo Cruz, A Place in the Sun, was the first thing.
Oh my God, that's an atrocious
But just
record.
to hear panning and just the depth of that, and then the first thing I heard in stereo, I think, was Boss Skaggs' Down to Then Left. But anyway, they just had
Which was weird because you've run me opening for Boz Skaggs twice.
Right. You listen to things on a 3-inch speaker till you're 6, 7, 8, and then all of a sudden stereo came up and it expanded that whole spectrum for me, and I was kind of blown away. I didn't know what a sound engineer was till I was 23. I went to Brown Institute after
Oh, you did?
fumbling around the U. I was supposed to be an architect, according to school tests, but took a lot of math, never really got going with architecture. Eventually went to Brown Institute, and they had was a 2-year program. 3 months of it were about audio, and that just hooked me right away. That was like the magic of the whole process. And from there, I had, excuse me, a friend in a band, and I would go to their practice space and fumble around with their little practice PA, Orvin.
Oh,
ODT. They had 2 speakers on sticks and a 6-channel mixer, and I would play with it. Eventually, they get a gig, and it was McCready's, 4th and 4th.
Oh, that was a great place.
And a guy from Southern Thunder named Skip brought me my first PA and helped me piece it together, and I failed miserably. And I kept failing.
Good guy to learn from, though, because he's a super
absolutely.
sweet guy.
And he's the head sound at the Orpheum right now.
Oh, okay. I
Yeah,
didn't know
he's
that.
been
Last
there
time I worked with him, he was at the Guthrie.
Yeah, he's been there forever. And I think Mr. Fleming worked with him. In fact, I know he did. So it was a natural progression. I think I've always loved music. I always paid attention to recordings, and like I would often sing musical parts more than lyrics. I wouldn't really listen to lyrics as much as like, wow, what's going on here and there with production.
Did you ever consider, like, did you ever face a fork in the road between the studio or the live environment, or?
No, never. I got to dabble in the studio. I was with bands when they'd go in the studio. I saw great engineers and producers work. We spent 3 months in Studio A of Paisley with Trip Shakespeare and all their big buck thing. And no, it was always live. I always liked in the moment of connecting with a band and their music, and the pressure of like getting it right and bringing it through the speakers so that people heard it the way it should be heard. That was where it was at.
So what were some of your first live sound gigs in venues besides McCrady's?
Well, the percussion went from working with that band, and that band would play around town at McCready's and the Caboose and the 400 Bar and the Fine Line. And from there, they would do shows not in bars, and they would rent a sound company. So I met the sound company, Lauren Wicklander, Wix Mix.
And this was the band you're talking about is Trip Shakespeare?
Nope, I'm not with them yet. I'm with Orvin, ODT. That was the name of that band. And then an African band named Shalita, big 7-piece. This is all before Trip Shakespeare. And then I met Lauren from that band using his company. Then I started to work for his company, and that's where I met Trip Shakespeare, because they used his company.
Oh, yeah.
And I basically just told him I wanted to mix them. And eventually the guy that was mixing them went on, Paul Smith, and I got the call. And the 5 of us, 4 of them and myself, traveled in one van, stayed in one hotel room for 5 years, just zigzagging the country and playing. It was amazing.
This band, for those of you that, for the 90% of people in this room who weren't born yet, you probably heard of a big famous songwriter from here, lives in LA now, named Dan Wilson, who wrote for Adele and the Dixie Chicks and everybody else. Dan and his brother, Matt, were the core of Trip Shakespeare, and John Munson was the bass player who plays in the New Standards now. And they were just a really wildly popular and entertaining band from here that always was on the cusp of breaking out nationally, but never quite did. They had at least 1, if not 2, major deals.
A&M.
A&M, yeah. And but regionally, they owned the Midwest. Every show was a big sold-out sweat fest.
Yeah.
And they were a great live band.
They had a cycle of recording and rehearsing and touring. It was perpetual. It was amazing. They'd rehearse 5 hours a day. I'd record it on a little 8-track thing sitting in the room, mix it that night, and they'd listen to it, and effectively always doing demos. Then they'd tour to get really strong, and they'd always plan their tour around coming home and playing a big First Avenue show, because the band's always top form after, like right on the tail of a tour. You're just, it's automatic. So
I remember I remember doing a show with them. I forget what band I was in, some crappy band, and we were opening for them at the Caboose. And as usual, I think it was a Halloween show, so they were really into like set design.
theater.
Yeah, theater. And so they had these big stuffed birds, like piñata birds, that were at a certain point in the set going to be released from either side of the stage, and they go "Roop," like that. And sound check was taking them forever. ever. I've never seen people sound check this long. And so my band wasn't going to get a sound check, which I didn't really care about. But I remember Dan Wilson had this sense of calm, and he got on the mic once right during the middle of this 4-hour-long sound check, and he looked at me and he said, Kevin, the preparations are endless, but the fruit is sweet. And I never forgot that.
Perfect.
That's probably like the story of your life.
That's a pretty good one, yeah.
So you worked with Trip Shakespeare almost like you were in the band, really.
I was definitely felt very much a part of that band, yep. And
And-
then 91 or 2, we parted ways. I went on to mix a bunch of other bands, and from there I would get like subbing house gigs in the bars and meeting other bands and then mixing them in other venues, and some of them would tour and I would go out with them. Always the opening band.
Word of mouth.
Yeah,
Yeah.
networking. Always with the opening band, chasing a tour bus. Did that for 17 years. And then never making any money, but living poor and loving it. You know,
Yeah.
it didn't matter. And then you get married and have a family, and you go, oh, I have to make some money, but this. And I was really fortunate that some of my friends had moved on into the corporate sound arena, and they ushered me into that. And that was very fortunate, and that led me to get all kinds of new skill sets to get the job I have now, which is at the State Theater. I've been there for 10, 11 years.
11 years running sound at the State Theater.
Yep, I'm the head audio there. See everything that comes and goes.
So how many, well, first, what was the first, I mean, obviously a lot of little clubs and stuff like that. What was the first, do you remember the first theater gig you did?
Working for the theater?
No, running sound in a theater
In
as
a
opposed
theater?
to a club.
I actually
yeah.
mixed Trip Shakespeare in the State Theater when they played for the MMAs.
Oh, cool. Oh, yeah.
Not
yeah,
on
yeah.
anything close to the system it has now, but they played in there. That was pretty amazing. And you learn right quick about the difference between reinforcing in a small little venue and actually getting to mix on a full system.
Oh, because in a venue like a big room like that, the room sound has nothing to do with the stage sound.
You can
whereas
just
in a
get
club,
over
it's-
anything the band does.
Right.
Right. In the entry, you're victim to what goes on stage. In fact, 90% of venues in the city, except for maybe First Ave, the main room. So.
That's interesting. I never really thought about.
Yeah, it's the difference between reinforcing, playing catch-up, I like to call it, and actually mixing. And I've always strived to, whenever I go in a venue, whether it is a small one or a big one, I have a reference piece of music that I'm used to. And even if it's a no sound check situation, I'll try and get that song played during a changeover and kind of equalize the system, and then the PA, for whatever it is, becomes my reference. Then I try and work with the band on not outplaying their room, which happens sometimes it doesn't. But you always I always try and mix one click louder than the loudest thing, so I am actually mixing and having the PA as a reference monitor.
What's the piece of music you use for a check?
I have a few. The big one is Elegantly Wasted by In Excess, just because the Honey Dogs, who I toured with for 7, 8 years, they did a thing with In Excess on their last tour, and
Oh,
was
I didn't know that.
3 months of hearing that song being tuned on PAs all over, so it's by their guy, so I got used to that. And I have a few others that check low end or something, but the big thing is just you knowing how it should sound. It can be any song, and I recommend not using an MP3 so you can hear the low lows and high highs, but just something you're used to and going, okay, well, everything is kind of in line. I can go from my memory of how to set it up.
So here's a question. I'm trying to ask questions that these guys would probably want the answers to, and we'll do some Q&A here in
Hopefully
a few minutes.
lot of Q&A, and I'd love to see you all. And
Trust me, they're all incredibly handsome.
all right.
Every single one. They don't if you're not handsome, you can't go here or teach here.
Okay.
So the difference between the tech end of your job and the head, like the ears part of your job and the what's between them part of your job, because like I said, one of the reasons I like working with you is this sense of calm. When you walk in, I feel like everything's going to be fine.
Okay. Allow me to expound. I don't know if anybody saw an article in the city pages about the 9 best engineers in the city. It was a surface article. You can't fault the writer. But it was almost more of a curse to those people that won, because some of them took some flack, just like, you've been in the business 3-5 years. There's guys that have mixed for anyway, it was kind of skewed. I got sidetracked. The question was about...
Oh, just if you want to talk about the difference between, my job as a record producer is similar. There's the vibe thing, the hang thing, and then there's the ears thing, the technical side, and then there's the people side. And just talking about the difference, because it seems like in your job, you'd really, really have to have both.
I think where I was going is I'm an incredibly confident engineer. I have a tremendous amount of confidence in my skills. In virtually any situation, I'm not overwhelmed. And I think it's good for every single live engineer to think they're the best, at the same time understanding they're one of the people that think they're the best. Because it takes a lot of confidence to stand in there. In my venue, there's 2,200 people. If it sucks, they're gonna get their money back and it's my fault. I put that pressure on myself to and yeah, I still get nervous when that curtain goes up. There's that, oh boy, here it is, and you're trusting all this electronics to just happen. So yeah, being confident, thinking you're the best is, I think, really important. You always want to be humble. You always want to be a perpetual student. That is definitely
But
key.
it's true, though, from my perspective, too. I can feel that vibe from you when we're working together. And as a musician on stage, I want that from the live sound guy. I don't want tension, and I don't want, fear. I want, because there's really two leaders to a live show, and it's not the lead singer of the band. It's not me. It's the drummer and the house sound guy. Those are the two guys who are actually running the show. So, like with my drummer, when I'm playing with Peter Anderson, I don't control the time. Peter counts off the songs, and if Peter moves the time during the song because I'm rushing or lagging or whatever, I follow him because I trust him and I'm happy to. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And same thing with like a live sound guy. During sound check, I want to be told what to do. Right. I don't want to be, feeling like I should run the show.
Right. And that's, thankfully there are artists like that, and there are artists that are not, and you have
want to control things even though they shouldn't, maybe.
Yeah, you can tour with a band and never get a sound check because they deem that time as rehearsal, or you can tour with a band that really works on their stage sound and blend and wants, so there is no given day to day, band to band. You could have the same band in the same room, same everything, and something might change, whether the singer is hoarse or the snare tuning dropped or whatever. You just can never, you count on things that are usual and you use that experience, but you never take anything for granted.
And you have to work with some pretty strong personalities. Like I remember this, just what we're talking about reminded me of a moment when I did 2 months on the road with Westerberg. And he would never show up for sound check. Right. Ever, ever, never. And then one time I was like, as I got more confident and realized, okay, I'm probably not going to be fired. We're in Omaha. He's, we're already on the road. I said, why don't you ever come to sound check? And he goes, it's always the same anyway. I can never hear my monitors anyway. Right. And I'm like, well, aren't you kind of putting the cart before the horse there? Because if you showed up for sound check, you know what I mean? But it was that kind of a thing. But the sound guy we had for the first month, it didn't even faze him a bit. Yeah. You don't seem like you get rattled no matter how much, of a horse's ass the artist or the band might be. I've never seen you lose it.
You're there for them, ultimately. It's that is your job. You are serving their wishes and bringing their music through. So
let's hear. You don't have to name names, although if you do, I'll laugh. Worst gig.
Worst gig?
Worst gig. Oof. Or a couple of horror gig stories.
I don't really have worst gigs. I have maybe least favorite gigs. I remember doing some all-day setup in a baseball field amateur violin contests.
That sounds really, really bad.
That was hard. And, driving home and it's raining and the windshield wipers squeak and that just puts it right back. That one stuck with me. Yeah.
artists that are you don't have to name names, but like certain bands that made it really hard for you to do your job, like if their stage volume's too loud and they just won't turn it down and things
Yeah,
like that.
that is hard, and that does take some of the satisfaction out of it when you know there's a difference that can be made and it's just not going to get
won't let you.
addressed. Right. And I I understand if you have to play that snare that loud to feel what you need to feel, then by all means. I mean, if you don't have lighter sticks or hot rods in your bag, and if that guitar has to be that loud to pick you up off the ground, I get that, but you need to understand what's going to happen on the other end. So.
Dick Shopto, who teaches here, has a great story about a very good friend of his that he knew since childhood that is a monitor guy on the road and has been for, I think, about 95 years. Anyway, this guy goes by the name Rock.
Okay.
And he was talking about his toughest gig. He's run monitors for everybody. And his toughest one was John Mellencamp, because John Mellencamp is an angry little man, apparently. I've talked to other people that have worked with him, and he's tough, and he knows it. He talks about it in interviews. His nickname with his band members and crew and everything is the Little Bastard, and he encourages that. Apparently, it's one of his favorite things about being John Mellencamp. Anyway, one time, this guy just started running monitors for Mellencamp, and Mellencamp didn't like the monitors, so he picked up a chair from the side of the stage and threw it into the monitor pit where the guy was. And he turned around, and as he turned around, all of a sudden this chair launches back up onto the stage because this rock guy, threw it back at him. And he went on to run monitors for Mellencamp for like another 5 years straight because that was an artist who was like, he wanted you to stand up to him.
Yeah, I've been told Prince kind of respects guys that aren't intimidated by him. Also, a friend of mine had his hand broken by Kurt Cobain taking a guitar to the monitor desk, and he went, no.
He was doing it as theatrically or because he was pissed at the monitor?
There wasn't a rock moment. It was I don't like my
petulant
monitor
moment?
Yeah.
You've always done front of house, right?
I've done everything, actually.
You've done a lot of monitors?
Predominantly front of house. When I toured, I was, when you tour in clubs, you're front of house, monitors, merch, driver, tour manager. You're wearing as many hats as you can. I think, I prefer front of house. I get the most satisfaction, although monitors is equally satisfying. It's a totally different angle on it.
Yeah.
And, I don't, I end up, I'm at front of house most, yes.
So who are some of the bigger shows that you've done at the State Theater that artistically maybe inspired you just over 11 years? There must have been some favorites.
Tom Waits, Elvis Costello, Brian Wilson. I've seen some tremendous Broadway productions. Jersey Boys, unbelievable, the production value of that and creative audio parts of it.
It must have broadened your musical tastes and palette over the years working with so many different...
Yeah, I've always tried to broaden them intentionally, and that was another thing I didn't want to get pigeonholed. I remember working at the Uptown Bar as a house guy, and it's a 16-channel PV, and there's a delay and a reverb under there, and it was very typical for not every other, but most of the other house people would do the same vocal sound on every band, no matter what kind of music it was. And I was like, I kind of adapted I'll let the band sound like themselves instead of me thing, and I've always strived for
That's funny because there's two different kinds of producers in the studio too, I think. A Daniel Lanois type who has his sound that he puts on the band, which is great. It's a cool sound. Or there's other guys like Ed Cherney, who most people have never heard of, because he's done the Ramones and the Rolling Stones, and he lets the band define the sound.
Yep.
So take us through a day at the State Theater. If there's a big show there, and let's assume it's a one night only or the first night of the show. Mm-hmm. What time do you show up, and what's the day like?
It varies. Once again, nothing given because every show carries a different amount of gear. Last Friday we had Martina McBride and her 4 semis of gear. And at the State Theater we have a street load, so that's another added adventure in the icy winter. So we showed up at 8 in the morning, the house crew and I had to take my big sound system down to make room for their big sound system. So we took mine down, stored it, then at 9:30 the call started, and we unload their...
How big is your crew?
my crew on that day, I had, I think, 9 guys with me. There was probably 50 some odd stagehands on that call, and it's all different departments. But
Yeah.
So 9:30, they open the trucks. We start bringing stuff in. That day took quite a while because it was kind of a staggered load in. The state's not that big, so we brought in the lights. Then they have to hang to make room for the next load of stuff to come in, and then the back line eventually. And eventually, by 1:30 or so, we were done.
Don't you ever feel like saying, "Why don't you just use our awesome PA"? Or
Well,
is it
that
just
was
one of those things?
well when the owner of the company is mixing and carrying his own PA. That's a hard sell. But
Yeah.
90% of the time, my PA gets used.
Oh,
That's
okay.
the Orpheum is a shell. They don't have a house system. The state has a very big, great system, and
I've seen your booth, and it's well appointed.
yeah, I'm dug in. But yeah,
So 1:30 then, and
1:30 they start line checking, things like that, and the artists usually show up late afternoon, 3, 4 o'clock. There was no opener, like I said, so they had a fairly long sound check. There was a holiday show, so there's all kinds of
Props
trees and foof, and they had a 40 by 30 LED wall, video LED, 40 by 30.
wow,
And that was a substantial.
and that was a sold out show.
Not quite.
Close.
About 3/4. It was good.
Good enough.
Yeah.
And she's a tiny little thing, Martina McBride, but she's got a huge voice, right?
Huge voice.
Yeah.
And a great band. Her drummer was great. Everybody was great. So sound check, then doors, then the set, and then as soon as they're done, it's anywhere from 2 to 5 hours to load them out. That one was closer to 5.
I bet.
Then we were back at 8 the next morning too. So I can work 60 hours on a weekend, and then, for instance, this week I don't work again until Saturday. So there's once again no given to the schedule either.
Which is great for someone who the idea of 9 to 5 just scares the life out of them.
Yeah, it is not that. January there's not many shows, and we do maintenance hours, and those are kind of 8-hour days. But still, you're doing things to maintain your system. So
Right. I had another brilliant question, and now it just flew away. Oh yeah, are you in the union?
yes,
You had to join the union because it's a union
when
house.
I got the job at the theater, I was in the union.
And do you find, is that like a pain in the butt, or is it cool, or is it just, or a little of both?
Ooh, a little of both. I can see the problems with unions and the benefits. The frustrating thing from an audio standpoint is when you have somebody who was deemed an audio person 20 years ago and hasn't stayed current on technology,
Oh.
and then they come in and they're supposed to do a skilled job on your call, and they can't do it.
And they're protected, there's nothing you can do
Yeah,
about
so if you rely on your number, seniority, as opposed to skill and ambition, I think that's the problem with any union.
it. I think it's the same with teaching here. Obviously,
Yeah.
we're not union, but
Any union.
if you were teaching here and you weren't active in your field and staying current, you can't teach here and then you're like, well, I'm still on Pro Tools version 4. I mean, it's just not going to work. The students can smell that kind of ignorance, and they aren't having it. I mean, I get away with it, but it's hard for the rest of them. How about some questions from you guys? Is there anybody in here whose favorite thing would be to go into live sound for a living, or that's part of your plan?
Can I see you guys? Is that possible? Is that going to throw off the white balance?
Well, there's a question right
Do I
over
know
there.
any of you?
You want to go into live sound. Do you guys have any questions for Jay? There's a question. When you're gonna ask the question, I'm gonna repeat it so we get it on the video feed.
Yeah, so I just recently was watching an interview with David Byrne, who talks about how as an artist he thinks people subconsciously write music for venues that they're used to playing.
Interesting.
And he says, like, for example, when he was in the Talking Heads, he's obviously used to playing all these bars and stuff like that, and the music is a lot more energetic and just simplistic. But is there, from your perspective, is there music that just simply doesn't translate to certain rooms? Or
Is there music that just doesn't translate to certain rooms? That's a great question.
That is a great question. Is there music that does not translate?
Like a show at the
Yes.
State where you felt like it?
Well, I think acknowledging your environment is key to any performance. For instance, I remember doing monitors for Michael Bublé, pop Canadian
Yeah.
Frank Sinatra wannabe.
Yeah.
Played Orchestra Hall, and he has a loud, big band, and the hang time at Orchestra Hall is 3+ seconds. So, that is one instance where, that was just the wrong place. They couldn't be amplified and projected to the audience the way it should be. That's that
So
space
that's
is
a booking agent issue. Maybe there was like they got a
Yes.
better offer from more money for a venue that's inappropriate, and
Yeah.
sometimes they'll take it.
if you really wanted him to play in there, then you would have had to bring in another system. They went with the house system that just could not conquer that hang time. So
Well, it's like seeing a show at the Roy Wilkins. I can't think of the kind of music that would actually work in that room. I think it would be better for like one of those things where they like a cattle show where they buy and sell cows. I think it's a perfect venue for that.
yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
roller derby.
with creative draping and the right system, I'd like to think you could play anything anywhere. So
You're a positive guy.
yeah, it can be. There's tools out there. We all know them. They can do it.
Speaking of tools, let's talk about the nerd stuff, because all these guys, most of these guys and young women, are into the gears and the knobs and stuff like that. What are the things that? How has it changed in the last? How long you been doing this now? Holy mother! 30 years. So obviously you've gone from a 16-channel analog system
Yeah.
at the Uptown, say, with one delay and one verb, to what are you doing now? Can you describe your setup at the State, and what
Yeah.
are your favorite things about it?
Well, my favorite thing about it is the new PA I got about a year or so ago. It's a line array. If you're not familiar with that, we can explain it. But I still have an analog front of house there. And that's the biggest difference since I started was the digital onslaught of everything. And your troubleshooting skills have to adjust quite a bit, instead of, this kind of signal path, you're like basically have reset on your desk. That's like a big part of digital troubleshooting.
But your main
Yeah,
board
I have
for
an
this-
analog because it still works. It's a PM4000, 64 inputs, 10 matrices, 10 auxes, 10 groups. And it still functions. I maintain it. It's clean. There's no reason to replace it. You can't sell it. It was 70 grand new. You could get 3 for it now.
3.
Yeah.
So for effects, you're using outboard.
I have outboard, everything.
And what are some of your favorite effects in that room that you lean on the most heavily? Your most trusted servants.
I love Yamaha reverb engines. I've always loved them. They seem
From the SPX 90 days.
yeah, just that algorithm's always translated well, and most of the Yamaha reverbs are of that. The TC Electronic stuff's great. I don't use effects a lot. I rarely use gates, rarely, and I use compression quite a bit.
And what do you use for compressors in that
I have 4 channels of crane song at the State Theater.
I remember seeing that.
Incredibly versatile. Really
I walked in your
transparent.
booth and there's all this turquoise, and I'm like, what?
Yeah, I have everything from Behringer to crane song. Crane song's $3 grand a channel, and you can get 4 Behringers for $200 or whatever.
Right.
It is. So there's a little everything. It's a 20-year-old system, the front of house, and eventually somebody will spill a Coke on it, and I'll get a Midas or something.
No beverages in your booth?
I put a nice curtain around me to kind of minimize that. So
I remember that. And have you worked a lot when you're working other rooms or touring on digital consoles?
absolutely, and I work on digital ones there also. We'll get a monitor desk that's digital.
Oh, okay.
I'd say 70% of the touring music acts carry their own front of house, and that is the other great thing is I get to see everything come through there.
Fun.
Yeah.
What kind of digital consoles have been your favorites or the most comfy so far?
I love the Midas. That
I've heard that
format
from
is
other
great.
people.
It's a different feel for. I didn't like the vertical layering feel of Avid and Digico and things as much as I like the horizontal layering of Midas. It's just better for me on a one-off situation. I haven't had the luxury of 2 months of pre-production where you can
Right.
set up your board and it never changes. When you're different night to night, I didn't want to become a lighting designer and have to sit out there and program all day. I'd like just have a template and go. And I think the Midas is better for that. So
What kind of plugins are you using on a Midas then for your?
that's the thing about Midas, you don't need them.
Oh,
It sounds good out the box.
nice.
And even when I'm on a profile or an SC48, I rarely use any plugins. I just go for good, clean mics and tones and just try and bring it through that way. And
Do you think some guys are getting maybe too into the plugins just because they're fun and because they can and stuff like that at the detriment of the sound, or is it just a
not to
personal
their
style
fault
thing?
if that's what they like to do. Have at it. That's just not my thing.
Right. Okay, I think it's time for more questions here. I'll make you guys ask questions if you don't. No question too stupid. They're in the front there.
What's your opinion on Behringer stuff? Is it like really high end or just professional?
What's your opinion on Behringer?
They're
gear?
outboard geared, or are you talking about the new X32? Or okay, well, Behringer acquired Midas a while back, and I thought that was a good move for them. Everybody was worried it would bring Midas down. I don't think that. I thought it brought Behringer up a little. They're low end pro stuff, borderline prosumer. Definitely functionable. You know, it depends what you're doing with it. You know, how hi-fi does the thing have to be for that thing, you know? So, no, if it functions, it's definitely great. It's priced right. So, and that X32 is very cool.
I've heard unbelievable. Yeah, someone was just saying that the other day that thing is the
Yeah.
bomb.
It's got Midas pre's in it. So
One thing I'll toss in on that is as a musician myself, I'd rather work with a guy with great ears and a great personality on a Behringer than a guy with less than great ears and or less than great personality with, you know, the most expensive board in the world. You know what I mean? Because there's got to be this kind of like heart-to-heart simpatico relationship between the sound guy and the band, so that he gets, you know what I mean? Like, so he doesn't mix like my three-piece rock band to try and sound like the Trans-Siberian Orchestra. You know, that he gets like that we want to sound like a three-piece rock band. So that's ears over gear any day. How about behind you there? There was a question over there. When you were on tour, did you feel like you should be doing more other things career-wise?
never. No, it was the best. I got paid to be a tourist, and you're treated like royalty. It's great. I mean, even if it's a crappy opening band, or even if you're playing for nobody, it was still like connecting with a band and their music like that was the best. So never.
It does take a certain personality, though, that obviously you must have, because some people go out on the road, talented people, and they just die out there. They can't take the schedule or whatever. One thing I noticed is that I was never been more grateful for my laptop and a bunch of books I brought and stuff like that, because I'm kind of restless.
Yeah.
And so you have to be able to be
I just drove all the
self-winding.
time. That was my
Oh,
thing.
you drove.
Yeah, I loved it. I drove every mile in the later tours.
Peter Anderson drives us. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, you get to see
I
the
don't
whole
drive.
country through the windshield. You know, you're on a tour bus, you travel at night, you don't see it. So that was pretty great. Anyway.
Funnest 3 towns you've ever played in the cities in the United States.
New Orleans, New
Yes.
York.
Yes.
Chicago's great. San Francisco's great. Austin.
Best food.
New Orleans? No, yeah.
And San
New York,
Francisco. I got to say San Francisco. There's no bad restaurants.
You know,
in
and
San
even
Francisco.
Minneapolis, too. Let's not forget here. This is an amazing town to grow up being an audio professional on many levels. So consider yourself lucky.
That's true. You don't realize how cool it is here until you play a city like, I don't want to rip on like, say, Cincinnati or whatever.
No.
It's a fine city, but like you have a lot of cities around the country that have a comparable population to ours, and there's about 1/100th as much money in the arts as here.
Yes. And it's also a tremendously supportive audio community. And that is the one thing I noticed traveling around. It's like it can be pretty cutthroat in New York and Vegas and Chicago.
Or territorial, like we're not going to help you. This is our turf, and we're holding.
No,
on to
but
this.
even in that, like, no, borderline cutthroat. Not like here. I mean, we really do support each other. You're not going to get every gig, but the ones you give up, well, something else will come around because of it.
I think the audio community in Minneapolis is more supportive of itself than the music, than the artist and musician community myself. I think it's really, I rarely meet an audio guy around here, whether it's studio or live, that isn't a totally decent fellow or woman.
Yep.
But I've met a couple of musicians that I didn't care for that much. Is there another question over here? There's one.
Just out of curiosity, are there any particular acts that were difficult for you on your end? Not necessarily because of the band, but just because of the instrumentation and the way the music worked?
Most challenging live mixes?
Absolutely. Some very good friends of mine are in a band that I mix, and both live singers have a ripping sibilance to their voice, you know, and it's literally like the space between their teeth. When they sing S's, it's really hard. And, you know, so that's just what it is, and you either have de-essers in your rack or hack high end to make it pleasing. But, you know, so things like that. Nothing's ever really a deal breaker. You just always just do the best you can with what's there at that time. So
I think, yeah, and also knowing it's rare that you're going to get someone at the show who's going to, at the end of the show, is going to go, I want my money back. There was too much sibilance on the vocal. You know, we need to remember, we're not like, it's not like, don't touch the green wire. It's not like the whole venue's going to blow up and everyone's going to die if we don't do a perfect job. Not that we don't try,
right.
but you got to find that inner calmness.
And literally, the only cure those singers could do is have their teeth filed. I mean, it's not like something.
Did you offer to provide that service?
I brought it up, but it didn't go.
No?
well, so.
Okay. You're not going to tell us what band that is.
John Eller, Chris Lynch,
Oh.
both those guys. Even Adam Levy has a pretty hard sibilance on some mics. You know, this 58s they can be your best friend, or sometimes they're troublesome. So.
I never noticed that with Adam's voice. I've noticed it with Lynch. And I'm a huge fan of both Eller and Lynch.
Yeah,
both.
they both have a ripping
I wonder what Price does in the studio. He mixes there.
DS.
Right, yeah. DS him. Another question for Jay. Once in a lifetime opportunity. He's not going to lie to you. A lot of them others will lie, but not Jay.
How many of you are going into live or thinking about it? Couple.
We'll have more as Jay's program gets ripping too.
Yeah.
There's a question over here.
Yep.
Advice
Theater
for someone
in
getting into
specific?
theater sound?
Well, first again, being in Minneapolis is incredibly fortunate. If you want to focus on theater, there's upwards of 200 local theater companies. You're not going to start at the State Theater. You start at, you know, the Lindale Garage or somewhere, and you fail. And don't be afraid to fail. And remember why you failed.
Yes.
And, you know, most of this business is, whoops, I'm not going to do that again. So
Try to not make the same mistake twice.
you know, starting from the ground up, network. If you have a friend that works for a theater company, go look at it. Look what they have in there for a system. Pay attention to sound designers. I just had Billy Crystal's thing come through the State Theater, and the sound, they dug it out of storage to retech it, to take it to Broadway. And the designer for the whole thing, who had done like Jersey Boys and Lion King and just, you know, resume like this, was in my theater for a week, and I just went to school on him. It was amazing.
That's great.
Yeah, so to address that, yeah, just start with the local theaters, go in there, and
Don't be afraid to work for free. in the
there might
beginning.
even be a sound design for theater class you could take. You know, the internet has got a ton of information on it, so
And always be really nice to Jay Fleming back there.
there you go.
There we go. We are really excited about that because Jay's worked his tail off for years to get that thing going, and he just got the funding for it. And when does it start? Like right after the first of the year?
Starts in January. I actually would like to make a comment. One of the first people that I went to when looking at designing the curriculum was Jay Perlman over at the stadium. A big influence on a lot of the decisions that went into not only the sound,
figure if we can crank out kids that make him happy, we're probably
Yeah.
doing things right.
And Jay and I have talked about that once the program gets up and running, that we're gonna be working together.
Yep.
Cool.
We're 5 blocks from each other. You know, it's the start of a journey, and I know I'm excited. I think Jay's been excited for
Yeah, very much so.
it to roll around too. So.
Yep.
I know I thought of two more questions that I want to ask. First is, what is the single most favorite thing about your job or the favorite moment of yours?
When a song ends and I'm rarely satisfied with my mix completely, but there are the instances where just everything came together, and that.
And you
right
know
there.
it was good.
Yeah, I mean I love working with. There's a number of friends of mine that are musicians in great bands, and I go in and out of the clubs and working with them, and there are just nights where everything comes together. Could be in the entry, could be the Ice House, could be anywhere, and you just go, wow, I couldn't have improved on that, and that's a great feeling.
And what's your least favorite thing about your job?
Least favorite. I'm getting a little tired of the street load-ins in the winter. That 11 years of bringing stuff in the cold is.
And
Yeah.
you have to help with that?
Oh yeah, no, I'm a working house head audio. We all do everything. So when the trucks show up, we're all out there, all conditions. So have some good gear.
Yeah. I know I'm kind of sick of carrying I was just thinking yesterday as I was carrying my Bad Cat amp, and this isn't even
Yeah.
my heavy Bad Cat, it's my lighter one. I was like,
And there was a day I embraced that. It's like, whatever, bring it on and let it rain. I don't care, But now it's like, ooh, it's cold out. So
yeah. No. We got any other questions for this guy? Oh, you pick.
you, sir.
What would be your favorite type of live sound to set up, whether that be music or theater?
Favorite setup?
My favorite setup. I kind of put the same kind of challenge on every one of them. Obviously, music first and foremost, but there are times where we'll have a movie in the theater, and I'll listen to the whole movie, and I'll walk the room just like I'm EQing it for a band. It's just take great pride in everything that comes out of a speaker at every show. That's your gig. So
You've done a ton of outdoor festival things?
everything,
Those to me seem
everywhere.
like that would be like just unbelievably challenging.
They can be, conditions.
Wind and such.
Yeah, I mean, I've done excuse me. I worked for a sound company that was debuting a Renkus Hines, the Smart System, back in the late '80s, and it was this really loud box, and they got hired to do an ice fishing contest, so we brought that thing out on a lake, and we could hear it like 3 miles away, on that flat plain. So yeah,
Ice fishing.
Done
and
it all. I mean,
Amateur fiddling contests.
Yep, I've set up PAs on flatbeds at intersections in rural Minnesota, everything. And that was great. When you're young, you can beat yourself up and have fun with it. So
Somebody's got to
I'm
write a book.
51 now. I started when I was 23. So I didn't know what a soundboard was till I was 23. So you got a big head start. I'll go with you and then come back.
Sorry, I don't mean to hop on.
No, that's okay.
No, that's good.
So I imagine you probably worked with some pretty difficult artists to work with, especially in like a sound check environment
Mm-hmm.
situation. Do you have any methods of kind of like easing tension during that?
Absolutely.
Or is it a situation where you just kind of have to
Well, you have to ask yourself, do you honestly think anything you say or do could make a difference? If you say yes, then yeah, it's all about understanding your audience. Who are you going to be talking to? What are they going to be receptive to? My angle, 9 times out of 10, is it's for the benefit of the show. I've asked guitar players to turn up as much as I've asked them to turn down. It's all like, what is it that needs to be changed? And you got to understand you might be dealing with an ego. You might be dealing with a drummer who just simply cannot take off any intensity and won't muffle his stuff. And, yeah.
One thing I've noticed with you, the way you deal with artists during a sound check and stuff like that, I've never seen you be reactive, even with someone who's maybe not trying to provoke you, but just
Right.
you know, you're always
And
Jay.
I
You're
won't do
always
it on
yourself.
mic. It's like if you have your talk back in front of house, you don't go, yeah, I'm gonna need you to turn that guitar down. You walk up to the artist away from the mic and tell them, you know, appeal to them on the sense of this is what's gonna make the show better for everybody. I
See, that's
understand
really
you need to-
smart.
Yes.
To not do it,
Don't call them out in front of any, you know, just do it privately.
because then it gets their pride up, and then
Yep.
you're gonna lose.
Anyway,
Another
Good
one back
question.
there. Back there.
Sure. So we were talking about frequency when you first started out.
yes.
Not many people in the room.
Yep.
Have you got any tips and tricks for really?
Absolutely. Great ones.
We've got some hearing exercises we're supposed to do for sound engineering, and I have a problem with the really low ones,
Mm-hmm.
the 31 and the 62 hertz,
Sure.
and the extreme high ones.
And you always will. I mean, that region is very hard to get exact. Right. The way I was educated, which was not formally like y'all, I was schooled by other engineers at sound companies and asking a lot of questions. But one thing I noticed guys doing is relating, you know, you break it down. You have the entire spectrum, and quite often you're staring at a 31 band, third octave interval EQ. So you've gone from one whole thing, and now it's divided into 31. An easy way is at least break that down into 4. You know, you hear a tone, decide which region of the 4 it's in, and then I have a series of like things I can imitate with my body that I just know what frequency they are. Like that whistle is 2.1K. That's just what my teeth do. So I can go octaves from that and slight offs. I know if I hum a certain note, you know, the vowels are really helpful. Like a U is close to 100. An O, well, what would be next? O, yeah. That one is, that's in the middle, but like E's are the high mids, S's are way up top. things
Interesting.
Like that. So you can narrow it down, and then just over time, and there is a great app for what it's worth. It's called Quiz Tones. You might even be using it. Developed by some guys right around here, audiofileengineering.com. It's called Quiz Tones. It might be $3-4. But it has one of the better things to, you know, you'll listen to tones on a single input, and then the most valuable thing is to like be able to hear tones on a finished mix, which is why I've kind of gravitated to front of house, because I'm really good at sculpting an EQ like that. I have this theory of taking away what shouldn't be there until it's exactly right. And it's kind of hard to explain, but sure. Yep. Yep, yep. And that's when you're dealing with DJ and finished program like that, it's more of mastering EQ, where you have to be able to pick out the ha is like 1K, 800, whatever, within that mix. And, you know, everything you change changes everything else
It's like
also.
a TP.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, a loud vocal is a quiet band. You know, a loud band is a quiet vocal. So to find that, you know, and it's all, it's a highly subjective, you know, completely subjective.
I like what you're saying though about
thing.
carving, because if I can fix an issue in the studio, my you know, playroom with reductive EQ, I'm going to be happier than trying to fix many things with additive EQ.
Yeah, and I would stress the no given to that too. It's really about trusting your ears, because that's your livelihood. And I was going to say that actually at the top of this whole thing is like, who's got earplugs in their pocket? Anybody? Well, get some. Just carry them with you all the time. You know, like even open windows in a long car trip, that stuff's fatiguing, and that's your livelihood. So protect your ears.
Remember when the last day job I ever had was working in a coffee shop that my wife owned, and we had an espresso machine that was really loud. And one time, Leo Kottke used to come in quite a lot. We got to be friends. And whenever I was making the espresso, he insisted on standing on the other side of the room because he's like, not going to do it. And it made a big impression on me, actually.
Did we answer your questions? Sorry, bud. You bet.
Any other questions for Jay Perlman?
This gentleman, no? Anybody? Yeah,
Anyone
go
else?
ahead. Mm-hmm. Nice. You're right there.
Plenty of time. It's I sometimes, I mean, I didn't even start mixing the records that I produced until like a few years ago.
Yeah.
And I'm 52.
Right.
You know, so I think some students here that aren't like 18, I've heard them freaking out like, I'm behind. You're not behind. Plus, you get better at learning stuff as you get older, I think, or learning this stuff. It has to do with your energy level and your passion and your focus.
Yeah.
More than
The
your
fundamentals, you know, learn something about electronics that'll never, ever let you down. I mean, even if it's Ohm's law and you're dealing with like speaker impedance or things like that, that'll bail you out. Definitely go to school.
Jay's smiling back there like,
Yeah.
I told you all so.
And the other two, gain structure and signal path. They will bail you out every time. And digital signal path is different and the same as analog. It's probably easier, I don't know if different, but it's easier to probably learn it in analog because it's actually laid out. You know, that lattice and matrix is, you know, laid out. And just understand y'all know what the difference between pre and post is? Okay, that took me forever, you know.
Well, it's funny because it's cool to be the guy that can make stuff sound great when everything's working. But
Yes.
in a live sound environment, I think this is the reason I will never run live sound. I could never take the pressure of what you guys do. You have to be the guy who can troubleshoot. Well, there's a room full of however many hundred or thousand people, and all of a sudden something doesn't work.
And along those lines, and if you remember anything regarding troubleshooting, start at one end and go to the other. Never start in the middle. You will chase your tail the rest of the day. You know, and here is the signal path, all right? You have my voice into this microphone, it has a diaphragm, right? It's moving, create an electrical, down this cord to some snake box, through the snake to his console, from his console, out to all the processing, to the amplification, to the speaker, through the air to your ear, shaking and telling your brain you heard something. Go to school on that entire chain. And for recording, you know, you're throwing in recording decks and that stuff. But go to school on that entire chain, because that's magic. You know, when it comes out here, through there to your ear, that's all voodoo. It's cool.
What we do is people think it's like interior design, but it's more like plumbing. You know what I mean? There's a practical aspect to whether it's producing records. You know, people like, oh, you know, and how do you vibe with the artist and stuff like, yeah, that's all important, but it's also like the band is set up in the studio or on stage or whatever, and it's just like, there's nothing coming out of the speakers. Are you the guy that can fix it, or are you not?
Yep.
It's
And if you're
plumbing.
not, that's fine too. There are many different gigs in this in the industry. There are great engineers who know nothing about setting up a rig, and there are guys that know about setting up a rig that know nothing about acoustics, or not enough. You know, there's front of house engineers, there's monitor engineers, recording engineers. It is a very broad field.
But it's kind of cool, and it gives you a certain feeling of security and hopefully a sense of job security if you're the guy.
Yeah, and go with what you love. You know, if you're interested in one thing, definitely stay on that track, because that's going to allow you to get beat up and come back. You know, I loved it. I didn't make any money. I think the most I made between 84 and 95 was probably about 15 grand.
We were on the same financial path.
Yeah, I just
for
lived
that
cheap,
time.
you know. My rent was cheap. I ate a lot of peanut butter and jelly and didn't care. So.
Jay Perlman, thanks for coming, you guys.
Yeah, thank
Appreciate
you,
it.
everybody. You can all find me through Jay. I'm open for questions, tours, internships, any of that stuff. So I'm around.